Thank you all for being here. I'm really very excited. One, well, three reasons. One, because I'm here. Two, because I'm talking to Sanjoy, and that's such a great opportunity. And three, because I love the topic of the book. And while I'm not going to delve on what the title of the book is, which is As a Ghost in My Room, I am actually going to go to what the subhead, in advertising we always used to ask, what's a subhead? What's the headline? What's a subhead? And I feel that that's where the crux of the book lies, and correct me if I'm wrong. So I want to talk about living in the supernatural. So, and humor me for a minute, and the audience too. Can I just ask you to just take 2 minutes, and not 2 minutes, 1 minute, and just think about something uncanny that may have happened, something that is unexplained, something that's, you can put a finger on, some sensation, feeling, what the French call frisson, something that has happened recently to you. Just think about it, and then park it there, and then we begin. I love that the lights are low. Yeah, but I'm not going to talk about the books. I'm going to talk about the supernatural. Okay, let's get back to you. So, I want to ask you first. You have a reputation that literally precedes you, almost like the spirits around you. And I know you've been asked this question, but I want you to answer this question for this audience. Why did you choose this subject?
This was really by accident. I had no intention of writing a book. In our family, the brainy one is my brother, who's sitting there. He's the nuclear economist, physicist, and financial genius. So I was always the artist in the family, and my dad used to ask both him and my wife, how should I introduce my younger son? Because the eldest son is, has a formal title. So during COVID, while everybody was baking bread and or writing their memoirs, a number of publishers came to me and said, can we do a 3-book deal or a 2-book deal or whatever? Because everybody wanted us to write the story about the Jaipur Literature Festival and its success, or the success of teamwork arts, and the idea of a company that looks at the arts. And it wasn't something that interested me. I mean, I will write that book, but it's a very political book. It's a very political story. And obviously I can't write it right now because anyway they beat up on us. So if this book were to come out, both sides of the divide would be doing a lot more beating. So Himali, I turned to my agent, Himali and Ranjana, and said, why don't you tell everybody that I will write, but in 2037 or 2040 or whatever, and just take it off my shoulders kind of stuff. And Himali then started saying, no, you do need to write, and everybody's been waiting for a book from you. So why don't you think about something you want to do? And as we were having a conversation, I said, okay, if I do write, because I don't want to do this, and I did this, and I did that, and blah, 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 why don't I write about the experiences that we've had with the supernatural, the ghosts in our life, and make that the memoir. So the memoir, as you know, is as much about food and travel as it's about things that go bump in the night or not necessarily in the night.
So one of the things that I read, and I keep my writer hat on when I read, and one of the things that is really, people kept saying that you shouldn't read the book at night and stuff like that. And I have a vivid imagination, so not just your story, but that, I added a lot to that. I found it was very restrained in the sense that there's nowhere where you kind of, in my head it is like art stuff. There's no sensationalism. And it's very matter of fact. So what I wanted to ask you was, have you done that deliberately, or it's just the way you are, the way life is. Because what I love about the book, in its in its tone and its writing, is this is what happened.
The funny thing is, so when the manuscript went from Ranjana and Himali to HarperCollins, who were the people who successfully bid for it, other people bid as well, and they appointed an editor from their side who was, Aaj Tak India Today headlines kind of editor, Sansani Khabar, and she was like, you have to do, and I'm like, screw that, there's no way that this is going to be, Sansani headliney kind of stuff, because it happens, but it happens like, it can happen here, it can happen outside, it can happen wherever. And this wasn't about the headlines, the ye hua on the dark, thundery night, the door creaked open and this. It's not. These are apparitions or images or things that happen, and I'm sure they happen to many of us, as we've seen. And in fact, at every time I've spoken, somebody's come up to me with their lived experience story, which is now coming out in an anthology that we're putting together later this year. And those are Sansani Khabar kind of, the dark of the night kind of stuff. But it's amazing that people have had such lived experiences and have not necessarily felt appropriate to talk about it. When I finished the book, the first person, Mala Singh in Delhi, calls me and says, Sanjoy, you're so brave. I said, why? She said, no, but how did you think that you can talk about this? I said, what? She said, a lot of this happens to me, but I've never had the guts to talk about it because people will think I'm mad. So I said, Mala, you are mad and people know you're mad, so I don't think you have anything to lose. And anyway, with me and my long hair, people think that anyway he's crazy. So, hey, I never thought of it as this, big new brave world.
But that brings me to that question that why is it that we don't talk about it? I mean, what's the fear, the stigma? Like you say, we think that people will think we're mad, or what was it? And you seem to be very, not the right word, but blasé about it. You're cool with it. So
I'm a cool guy, so I am cool. Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah, it's strange. I think because we were all brought up in a very logical space, and remember, Prabir and I were brought up, we are naval kids, so we're brought up in a particular way. So you're never brought up to think that, whether it's the occult or superstitious stuff is part of your reality. You are brought up to think logically, rationally, and that's what our education, somewhat a failed system in itself, has sort of taught us. That it's like the previous panel. Do you connect with yourself as an individual? Do you connect with yourself as, how you identify with yourself? But it's an exploration. And remember, in the early times when all of this happened, my first sighting was when I was 5 years old. You never looked at it ki bhoot pret aaya. Meaning an incident happened and you got on with it and, life carried on. So it was never I saw a ghost. Yeah. This I saw a ghost kind of bit comes much later in the journey. After Punita begins her journey and then starts connecting all of this back to perhaps this is what some of this is. So you do not, none of us are brought up in a sense. If we were in the hinterland of India, or if we were in tribal spaces, or if we were in touch with our animistic part of our lives, I think we'd be far more familiar and easy with, what happened. So a lot of the earlier stories, Bengali bhoot stories, or Marathi bhoot stories, or Malayalam bhoot stories, do that because they set it in a particular kind of milieu in the past or in the jungle, or there's always an animistic aspect of it. Whereas we, in a very urban setting, we never look at it, we never understand that everything has an energy. Each of us have an energy, but the table, the chair, everything has an energy which is very perceptible if your antenna, is being tuned to receive it.
Yeah, and that brings me to this point where, yes, you had your first sighting at 5, that's very young, and you seem to remember it very, very vividly, because that's how it comes out in the book. It's like it happened yesterday. But there was a long period when you were a skeptic. And, you know, is there a point now in your life where you kind of look back and say, hey, that thing that happened could have been something to do with the supernatural or otherworldly? Or
I'm not necessarily a looking back type of person, but you're, you're absolutely right. I mean, skepticism is part and parcel of the way you are. So even today, if I have an instinct, so Google Maps saying go straight, but I have an instinct saying go left, then you debate, do I follow my instinct? Do I follow Google Map? And if I don't follow my instinct, I typically get into a jam, just as a very simple example. So more and more, once you are able to fathom that instinct or gut instinct, which science today is showing is our gut brain, which is pretty much responsible for making many of our decisions and taking it up to our logical brain. It's part and parcel of that. And if you're able to tune into your instinct in a way that works for you, I think everybody, when they look at taking a decision, somewhere apart from the logic of what's written on the piece of paper or what you research, you tend to be far more instinctive in doing something. And the other aspect is, when you wake up in the morning, think of somebody, and lo and behold, there's a WhatsApp message from that person. Or, at some time during the day, you received a call, saying A, B, C, D, E, and G. How do you then marry that into this age? Yes, we are all connected on WhatsApp. Many of you will remember the time when Ganeshji was drinking milk. There was no WhatsApp, there was no, that kind of stuff going on. But Ganeshji drank milk in X place, and within that 24 hours, the world was getting Ganeshji to drink milk. Poor Ganeshji, good for the milk folks perhaps, but not sure about the rest. But how do all of these things work? I think that's the interesting thing. That's what we need to inquire into. And for those of you who've been following the work that's been happening in Switzerland with the collider, they're now talking about the neutron that makes up all of us, and that neutron is then connected to the other neutrons, which makes up dark matter and space, and you then continue to exist in a perceived or a not so perceived way, irrespective of the bodily form that we have.
So, this whole, I want to call it a cult of manifestation and, thinking and believing it to be true and stuff like that. You feel that there's a line of truth happening there, or is it just blown out of proportion? Because we are talking about a place that we inhabit that's also inhabited by otherworldly creatures, whatever it is. And, you're talking about this kind of extrasensory feeling that you get when you feel a presence, or when you get that message, like you said, WhatsApp message, because our friend reads a lot, and, when I got your book, I said, I must find out whether she's read the book. And she messaged me, unrelated message, nothing about book, but she messaged me when I was thinking about that. So it was really uncanny. And she messaged me something very trivial and just, information kind of a thing. And of course, I called her 3 days later to speak to her. But I just thought, which is exactly what you said today. But do you think that there is another way in which this thing is making its way back into our lives? Because you see so much of this happening.
To some extent, I think it's also the way science is, trying to map our brain. And as we know, we only use 1/11 of our brain, or 11% of our brain. And science is also more and more saying that in this vast universe, there are other dimensions. The universe is not flat. The universe is traveling at the speed of 600,000 kilometers a second or whatever. All of this. So there's stuff that we don't know. And much of this in the inquiry, science is unraveling the fact that we don't know to begin with. And therefore, if we don't know, there's a possibility that all of this other stuff which is people who exist in different dimensions, energies that exist in different spaces, may be possible because we don't know. And this idea that don't know is a fact is now been established. And if in the future we're trying to find out more and more, remember the first great philosophers who said that the earth revolved around the sun had to have poison and were executed for their very, very ideas that were completely as an anathema to what was being believed. So I think it's part of that. It's also part of human or modern human evolution of now being far more inquisitive and inquiring. I mean, the other side to this, which is the problematic side, is a lot of people said, oh, he's written the book because he wants to become friends with the ruling party, for example, which would be lovely, and Sandeep, I hopefully will take my message to this. but there's the sense that because there's this heightened machismo understanding of Hinduism, that everything is then related to the idea of Hinduism. I mean, this has nothing to do necessarily with religion whatsoever. But sure, in the religious pursuit, if people actually wish to read, which sadly people on the right don't read and they don't write either necessarily, but this is not a critique of that at all. They will see in our scripture much of the siddhis that the earlier saints or gurus or whatever did. They did it in a sense through their tapasya. They got these siddhis, and these siddhis then allowed them to do whatever, whether you believe in the warfare, the Mahabharata, or the epics, etc. I mean, that figment of imagination existed, but we also know that they did have a sense of command, and they were able to travel beyond the being into other spaces through their mind and through their siddhis. So if you're able to connect with that, and in the same way that, say, in Malai Kotla, they still today, if you go to the Malai Kotla thing, whoever is presiding on the Ganti there does receive this other energy, is able to then to thousands of people relate their story or solve their problem by basically whispering to whoever's standing, whichever soul he's got captured, to say, uska ghar dekh ke aao, uska bibi ko pata karke aao, kind of stuff. That kind of stuff still exists in our milieu today. Whether you accept it or not, that's a different matter. But outside of these kinds of spaces, the Bombays and the Delhi, this is reality for most people.
I will come back to two episodes in the book that I found very interesting. One is, of course, when you got hit by water rafting with them, and then it kind of led to 2 weeks of what people labeled as possession. And again, I marveled at the way that you just put it as, if I were to say it in 3 words, this was happening. But if you look back now, is there a feeling you get about how it was, what you felt at that moment? Because I'm really interested in what was it like.
So when Punita, my wife, read this chapter of this possession chapter, she said it wasn't even 10% as horrifying as what it was in real life. Remember, I was out of it. I have no memory of this period at all. And everything that's written here of that chapter is been told in terms of by all the witnesses there. So that's the recapturing of what happened. But looking back, because one went to counselors, one went to psychiatrists, one did an ECG, and all of that, ESG, all of that, in terms of finding out was there any trauma to the brain, and if there wasn't, how do you explain this, extra strength of flying off the seat of a bus for 6 or 7 hours despite 5 or 6 people, many times larger than you, sort of holding you down? How do you explain that? I'm sure science and medicine has explanations of how this extra energy comes into being, but I'm not aware of it. I don't have an awareness necessarily of what happened. yes, what I do remember is being extremely listless and not wanting, and in many ways having this sense of I'm not going to use the word suicide because it wasn't, but certainly bringing about self-harm in some way, throwing oneself under a bus or whatever it was that I was trying to do. And then after a while, like I said, I just got so bored of being listless and not doing stuff that it was literally, I remember even today, the night that I was like, fuck this is like so boring. And next day I was in office. So it was like a switch that went, and I was like, whatever's inside, basically fuck off. And let's get on with it kind of stuff. And the next day I was in office. So it wasn't that it was a slow transition and it took me time. And I went through therapy and counseling and therefore got my act together. It was like a switch was thrown somewhere and I was back. Yeah. And the only time that I reflected on this, there was a incident then later, many years later, in Jerusalem, that I write about in Mishkanot Shelamin. Mishkanot Shelamin is like the IIC or the RSS headquarters in the IIC equivalent in Israel, and it overlooks the old city. It's on the edge of the valley of Jahannam, or where hell, the name hell derives from. And it was again at night. I just come back, lay down to sleep, try to get all the lights off, etc. And I felt this incredible pressure of somebody trying to, possess me, and that panicked me completely because I said, "Oh my God, this is the same thing that's happening as them." And that panic was, that's something that I know I experienced. That so I fought off whatever that was trying to, try and possess me till I couldn't, and whatever it was that subsumed into my being, which is when then I got up, turned off the lights, spoke to Punita. I've been to the Church of the Sepulchres, which has just been shut down for the first time, and I took out, there was a Kerala a priest there. He blessed this thing of Mother Mary and given me rosary and holy water, and I sprinkled it. I did all of the stuff that you typically do when you think something's going to happen. And I, did the rosary bead, and I took out the photograph, and I sprinkled, the bed, and I went back to sleep. It's only later when I was researching the book and researching on Mishkan and Shalamin in terms of bringing the whole story, the whole, 360 degree, that some of what was told to me as what happened then came to be true in terms of the research that I did.
Yeah. And so one part of it was the earlier one where we're talking about the one of the white water rafting. And what I like is while that incident was really really scary, you brought in a sense of humor in the whole thing, because I think a friend of yours was eating samosas when
Yeah. He's an eaty boy.
Great. I mean, I love samosas, but I'm not sure that's the right time. The second part is, that there was an accident that you and Punita witnessed. You kind of brought the victim home. And I was wondering, would you like to read that part? I have bookmarked it.
Oh, yeah. This is a chapter called Healing. It's chapter 11. It's based in Gurgaon. We've now moved to Gurgaon. Not a leaf stirred. Humidity hung heavy in the air. The traffic lights blinked nervously, amber on, amber off, alerting late night drivers to slow down as they approached the intersection. But the speeding gypsy in front of us neither paused nor heeded the sign and hurtled through the crossing, hitting a scooter that had slowed down. The rider's helmet flew off as he was flung into the air and slammed onto the unyielding road, thick crimson blood oozing from his head as his life force ebbed out of him. Punita and I were driving down Lodi Road when the accident took place. The gypsy paused briefly, the driver leaning out of the window to see what had happened. At the sight of the crumpled body, he must have panicked and he sped off into the night. We stopped, called the cops, and the emergency services were arrived soon after. Sirens piercing the nights, lights flashing. Yet even as they transferred the body onto the stretcher, you could tell the victim hadn't survived the accident. We looked at the ambulance pulling away into the distance with a sense of disquiet and sadness. We drove back home in silence, thinking about the shock the victim's family would experience when they received news of the tragedy. As we crawled into bed, Punita sent the departed soul love, light and healing and drifted off to sleep. A few hours later, I woke with a start and perceived a red energy towering above me, filled with anguish and rage. The victim of the accident had travelled back with us, disoriented and distraught. I apologized to him and explained that we had nothing to do with his death, that we had stopped to help him and had waited till the ambulance arrived while the gypsy that hit him had sped off. Death from a sudden accident invariably leads to a great deal of confusion for the victim's spirit. It takes them time to understand that they no longer inhabit their body and they aren't quite sure how to respond and where to go. Many of us have unresolved issues when we die, especially if we die young and unexpectedly, and these need healing and closure. It took a while to calm him down as Punita sent the healing energy and guided him towards the light. But it is frightening. It's frightening for everybody. It's frightening, and the kids still, our eldest son, he was visiting us, and he's at this great martial arts, whatever. In the room, in the middle room upstairs, he senses somebody who comes and sits at the edge of the bed, and he knows the mattress depresses, and he recognizes the person through their scent. My mother inhabits their room downstairs every now and then, which is why Prabir and Subina think twice about staying there. But Mani, a friend of ours, Nadeep Suri's, Ambassador Nadeep Suri's wife, has often had full-on conversations. Like, my grandson isn't getting married, and what do you think, and how's your daughter? And then she comes and reports all of this to us. Those are the nice ones. Those are the happy, let's have a chat kind of people. But most of the time, it is frightening. And it's just that I don't articulate it as, that you're terrified of your life.
And when you say most of the times, it's like an ongoing.
We live with this kind of stuff. All of us sense them, see them, blah, blah, blah. So it happens fairly, we've only recorded, 13 or 14 of these incidents. But in this new anthology that we're putting together now, Aditya will share his incidents or what happened to him with his house. So it's not just me, it's we as a family. So we're sort of like the oddity family who collectively sees things that go up in the night.
And do you think that acceptance of this is more in India, or is it equal? Because there was another place in Switzerland where you saw something and they said, no, we've not had any kind of stuff like that.
They lied. This was in the ambassador's home, and later they didn't want their maid to be frightened. So that's the reason they said, no, nothing like that happens. But when again I researched, that place is haunted. And it's haunted by this particular forest spirit. Most places, the Americas, I walked into this hotel in Boulder, Colorado, the Boulderado, and I walked into the foyer and I'm going, oh, there's something here, there's a girl here. And so I asked the receptionist, I said, is there a person who sort of, shouldn't be here, is here kind of stuff? And everybody said, oh no sir, not at all sir. The Boulderado was the first hotel ever to be built. Boulder was a mining town, so it was part of the big gold rush. It was also the first brothel that was created, and this woman hangs herself in the corner room in the Hotel Colorado, which I didn't know till a couple of times, and it took me a couple of times of going back each time, and I'm like, who is this? And then I started doing research and speaking to the hotel earlier owners, and then they said, actually, yeah, it is, but we don't talk about it. I said, it's a great marketing opportunity. Everybody who likes ghosts will want to come to your hotel. Come on.
Yes. What's the acceptance like? I mean, is it still black and white, grey?
I don't know, but now everywhere that I go, a new anthology will have stories from people at the British Library, stories from people in the Americas, in Singapore, and Australia. So it's just this that you don't ever articulate that you've had an encounter, because you think that people will think you're nuts, or that you need medical health advice or mental health advice, which is also, it's all part and parcel of this. I mean, I can't do this, is there a division between this and that? It's all part of the same makeup in some sense of the word. So, but is this, I mean, the stories, like I said, that I'm now collecting or people are writing and sending to me, is way more horrorful than what I have talked about. And it's way more dramatic in the staging of it, or in the way that it's been related. So, and most cultures, Native or First Nation Inuits, American Indians, the Africans, the Haitians, the Cubans, everybody has a staple of ghosts. Like, in Bengal, we have many kinds of ghosts, and because Bengalis are racist, and we also divided on religious life, we have a Muslim ghost, we have a Mencha, which is a Muslim ghost, which is named specifically. Then you have a Shakchuni, then you have a Churel, and you're married to a Shakchuni, so say if you just got married, and you ask for a Rasgulla, and the Shakchuni just extends her arm all the way to the windowsill and picks it up, you're in trouble and you should get out of there.
Is a tax on the windowsill? Okay, I'm going to bring this back to the real you, which is, of course.
As we heard from Kiran and Shonali, there's many uses, including the you that nobody talks about.
Yeah. So you've been known to create legacies, and of course you're so closely associated with the Jaipur Litfest. You kind of built it over there. So do you think that this is something you've started now? Because you're already talking about an anthology. You kind of address the elephant in the room, so to speak. Do you think that this is one part of a legacy that you've started saying that, okay, I'm going to build this semi or impermanent world?
Certainly not consciously. But the funny thing is that just this year, and in Jaipur it became a theme because there were 5 different books that arrived by people who written on those. So there was Eric Chopra's book on haunted Delhi, for example. Amitabh Ghosh's book is also on hauntings.
Yes.
There's a number of new books that have come out on either historical hauntings or hauntings. Fiction-wise, it always exists. The ghost story has always been around. The Portuguese of the world has always been around. So I don't think that's new. I think the telling of the story from a first-person narrative account it's not unusual, but it could be something that's there. And because it's already traveled fairly far and wide, the book, we are getting in more and more. I mean, we're seeing more and more people writing or willing to now pen their own experiences with some of this, with what we call the occult in the larger sense.
Yeah, so I think the shift is because you've taken it as a memoir, and it's not like a fictionalized telling of a tale. And I think that's the bold step forward. I want to ask you one last question. We started with getting the people thinking about something uncanny, or something what we call a coincidence, serendipity happening. What is it that you would like to tell us, the people who may not have had any experiences like that, about what exists around us? What is it that we should be aware of? Maybe Sunita and your brother? The science part of it?
I didn't set out to tell anybody anything. I mean, that wasn't the purpose of this book. The purpose was, putting it together as a memoir and really just using that as a pen to really tell the story of travel, of the arts, of food. There's a lot of food. There's a lot of wine. There's a lot of vodka. It was really about that. Now, people are sort of, coming back and saying, hey, is this what you want to do? And I don't want to do anything. I'm like, hey, I put the story out there. Believe it, don't believe it. Typically in every gathering, somebody would stand up and say, have you been to a psychiatrist? Yes, I have. Do you think you're nuts? Of course I am. But the interesting thing was when we did this in Sundar Nursery in Delhi as one of the many lunches that I have to do. I have long hair, so I get invited to many of these places. Somebody got up, a doctor got up and sort of challenged this question, and Dr. Trehan, who set up Vedanta Medical Services, and Madhu Trehan, who Sandeep will know, who was one of the pioneers of the India Today magazine and TV Today, they both stood up and they said, we both have experienced what Sanjoy is talking about. And Doc said, I do this every day. And their stories will be in the next anthology. So in terms of the medical aspect of it, it's not so much, that this doesn't exist. Like I said, because we only know the usage of only 11th of our brain, and we only understand millionth of what happens in the universe around us, the possibility of stuff around us existing is there. But more importantly, I want to connect this back to nature. We forget that everything has an energy. Every tree, every plant, every shrub, and if you deal with nature in a way that's respectful, nature will respect you back. What we're doing across the country and across the world by throwing bombs, we keep thinking it's somebody else. It's not somebody else. It's one home that we all universally inhabit, which is the earth. Anything that we do to damage the earth in any part of the world, whether it's the way that we're cutting down trees to build whatever here, or creating new dams or new power works, however important those things may be, we have to be aware of what we're doing to the environment around us, and that every aspect has an energy. And that's something we need to be very, very aware of. Sumira, in many ways, in her book on aging, has touched upon some of that. Again, a beautiful, not in a book, in her film, again, a beautiful film. And we need to be conscious that, yeah, sure, we're young, but we continue to journey through. And as we journey through, we look at the world differently. We experience what happens around us differently. The same incident that would have happened to any of us when we were young, and then later when we were not so young, and then much later in the age frame that we are in, we perceive it differently. So has the truth changed? The truth may continue to be that of one, but our perception changes, and therefore the perception of what's around us, the perception that other things may coexist in spaces, is something perhaps that we should look at as a possibility. I'm not here to say believe, I'm not here to say these are the messages or whatever. What I didn't want this book to be, and maybe that's the reason I really made an additional effort to make sure that the underpinnings, the tone, was I didn't want to come out with as a Babaji, in seek of a sect. With long hair, very easy to do. I'll probably make much more money doing that. I'm giving messages than doing the arts, but it's not something that I wear very comfortably. So even today, when I get a message, when I get many messages, I don't necessarily go out there and say, "Oh, hello, by the way, you're going to die this." I don't.
No, and that's what I started with. I think it's a beautiful read and it's very restrained, and I love that about it because it's so matter of fact. And great, thank you very much. I'm going to throw this open to the audience, and if you have any questions, and for the people who kind of reflected right in the beginning, have you got any answers? It'll be great to know.
Thank you so very much for being this week you also say, because I do a lot of work in a similar space with more spiritual meaning. Okay, can you hear me now? Yes. So, हम लोग हमारे यहाँ पे बहुत कहते हैं कि with this whole thing of discovering new things and whatever becomes discoverable and explained becomes science, and the rest of it continues to be hocus pocus and spiritual. But we often say this, that just because we didn't invent a transmitter or a radio to capture radio waves or a television to the 100-200 years ago didn't mean that the waves still exist. So it's just a world that we need to be aware of. I want to thank you personally for vocalizing, normalizing, articulating, and making me feel more comfortable with things that I've been experiencing since I was 13. The question that I have is that at some point of time, and because it came to me later, adolescenting age, I wasn't even very sure. It was a very unpopular experience because in my worldview, what I saw was something that everybody was seeing. So I didn't even know that this is only mine, right? That got fed back in a very uncomfortable, unpopular process. And even now, I struggle to create a process around it, right? So for all your experiences and for the family that the oddity family, is there a journey that you want, is there a path that you can, not a set, but a path that you can help us with, to help us resolve ourselves, for those of us who have these experiences and don't know what to do with it, and enable us further?
So when I was young or not so young, or even pretty much through university, etc., I never looked at these, I never understood this as bhoot pret or ghost or whatever. It's only when Punita decided that we had to get married and she went on her spiritual path, did she get this understanding that perhaps what was going on was, a process. And her process of healing, or what she discovered as a process. Because I used to look at it as mumbo jumbo, pretty much so. And one day I told our sons, I said, Mom's going to turn us into cockroaches one day. So maybe we should go and check out what she's doing in this whole mumbo jumbo kind of stuff. So that's how I ended up going to her ascended master, and that's how the journey started. Do I believe? Not quite still, in a sense. Do these things happen? Of course they do, so you have no choice but to, because there's empirical stuff that it's happened. Has the journey of healing happened in a way that's a journey? Yes. Can we heal ourselves? Yes, of course, as you know, as you've been doing. Can we be open to the idea of healing? Very difficult. Because we're not brought up to understand that the healing is the inward reflection. And more so in today's, angry Hanuman era, everything seems to be outward because your phone is giving you an outward experience, your selfies, everything is about an outward journey, not an inward journey. But if we go back to any kind of research and reading, it is the inward journey that leads to understanding, acceptance, and then therefore the possibility of healing. So you have to go through that, disbelief, to opening yourself to the possibility of understanding, and therefore to the journey, and therefore acceptance, and therefore healing for yourself and healing for whatever you've come. I mean, you know what they say is that we come into the world with our whatever our agenda is, whatever our soul story is, to heal that bit that we haven't been in our past lives. And whether you believe in past lives or not, that's a different thing. And if you do that, this intuition or your soul guides are there to help you make that journey. And if you're able to crack the code and resolve whatever that past life is, and typically it goes into relationships because you're born in your soul groups. So you commit the same mistakes again and again and again. That's what we do. We make the same mistakes. History repeats itself because nobody leaves. We repeat the patterns that we live in, relationship to relationship, because we're not aware of how we need to break the code. And pretty much taking from that last section, it is a journey. It is self-awareness. Doesn't matter whether you're general-in-chief or commander-in-chief or whatever, board-in-chief or chairman. That's the outward. Your journey has to be, and you know this, you're asking the question, but you know the answer pretty much to this.
Yeah, hi. So that was a very interesting conversation. And I think the part where you spoke about everything having an energy is something that, I only recently sort of started thinking about these things, and I do feel that perhaps not about inanimate objects, but certainly about, living things around me, small and large. But I was interested in knowing when you have that particular episode where you said, it felt like possession, lasted many days, was terrifying for people around you as well as for yourself. What was, and you visited many medical professionals, what was their take on it? Did they sort of give you a medical diagnosis, or was it unexplained? What was that?
So I went through a whole process. I first went to Sanjeevani, then I went to Dr. Sethi. And nobody could quite pin it down. I mean, the most intriguing question that I was asked by Alvinder in Sanjeevani was, so what makes you want to give so much, kind of stuff. And that was roughly the extent of that. So nobody could quite pin it down. So medically, nothing showed up. I mean, in terms of mental health analysis, it didn't seem that I was crazy at that point of time, at least. So nobody could pinpoint that this was a mental health issue per se, and that was roughly it. So there was no medical intervention per se. So it's not that I went on any medication or, went back for a series of programs. It wasn't, because everybody sort of said, listen, this is unexplained as far as we're concerned. What's happened to you, may have been momentarily that you were experiencing something or whatever, but you seem to be, cogent in terms of mentally at least all there. But I'm not set any rules, so too clear. I'm an actor, so I can pretend to be nuts or not so nuts.
Sanjoy, thank you so much. It's been a lovely conversation. I hope everyone enjoyed it. Thank you to the audience for being there. And the books outside when Sanjoy is here, I think we should get a copy signed.
So again, a big thank you to Max City Litfest. I mean, I keep saying the success of the Jaipur Literature Festival is not that we have, 500,000 people or 30 million people who watch us online. The success has been that 300 odd festivals have sort of arisen all the way from the Bay Area Berkeley Festival to the festivals in India. And many congratulations. We need many more of these festivals in every town, every village, because through considered knowledge, you may be able to push back on ignorance. And we know that ignorance causes the kind of hatred for religion, for other people, for minorities, for people who don't fit, etc. And if we can push back on that ignorance and push back on hatred, maybe we can push back on violence. And maybe if we send Trump a book and he starts reading, it may help. I don't know. Certainly hasn't helped Netanyahu, but.
On that note of optimism, let's have a